Unlearning an AI. Harrison, Kim, we were talking just before the show about that. That's what we have to talk about because this is such a big topic. And people don't realize it's not storing it on some relational database or something like old school stuff. And really eager to discuss that. But we also have some topics from quantum computing on that I want to talk with you with your vast experience and background. Good to have you on the
Absolutely.
show.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Dana. Good to be here.
Dana, would you do a little introduction first?
Sure. So, with over 25 years of leadership experience in driving innovation and technology transformation within leading tech firms, including PayPal, Google Cloud, and IBM, Harrison is recognized as a dynamic and visionary leader who creates operational and organizational excellence by leveraging AI and cloud solutions with advanced analytics and people management. As most recently the head developer of R&D at PayPal, he spearheaded the formation and leadership of a compact, agile team dedicated to enhancing engineering productivity through AI and machine learning innovations. One of his successes, and he has had many at PayPal, was the orchestration of a Gen AI solution that autonomously addressed 24% of code quality issues, saving 250,000 human hours.
Wow.
250,000. Harrison's ability to understand industry trends and formulate long, mid, and short term missions to improve customer outcomes has helped him to become known as the dynamic and visionary technology leader he is today. According to his many corporate admirers, and I'm one of those.
Uh-huh.
And you will be too, Martin, once you
Mhm.
get to know him more. And professional connections. Harrison prioritizes building durable but cohesive teams by cultivating an open culture and blending the human aspects with technology. The results? Business performance is maximized. Welcome, Harrison.
Thank
Yes,
you.
yes. This is so exciting because let's just start with this unlearning on AI and kind of
Sure.
explain what the problem is that most people don't understand. I often will tell people if you have a programming background from school years ago, it might even hurt you in understanding AI because it's so radically different than our old school of databases and everything else.
Yes. So this is actually a problem that's right now closer in Europe, but it's coming fast to us in US because the US is actually following in this case. The US has gone ahead. But this idea of a being able to delete oneself from the internet or delete one's data, the infamous, please forget me option on Google, that's real in Europe, where you can actually send a quick mail to Google saying, please purge my data. And the large companies like Google have gone through a extensive amount of work to make sure this could be implemented because it's not trivial. It's a lot of data. Now, when it comes to AI, where it becomes a problem is um, with the Gen AI, a pre-trained model has become a latest trend. It used to be that before you create a model and you basically somehow gather enough data to train the model, and you know where the data came from. Now, when you use a pre-trained model, you trust the integrity of those data, and they basically tell you, well, we kind of use the vast amount of data that's readily available. So even if we trust that they use only public data, uh, when a pre-trained model is trained, the set of data it used is part of that model. It is not sitting somewhere else, like you mentioned, Martin. Unfortunately, it's part of the model. So what if somebody comes to Google and say, please delete my data? And that information about that person or article about that person or article mentioning his or her, their name was part of a training data. What are we going to do? Well, the easiest way, the only way we know how to do it is, okay, go sift through the training data, remove the data, and retrain the model. Okay, that alone is very costly because we know we're hearing, how much, OpenAI slash Microsoft and Google and everybody is spending on training a model. So one, that's incredibly costly. But two, where it hits home closer is, what if your business is built on this pre-trained model? What if you released a customer service agent built on a pre-trained model? And now all of a sudden, your pre-trained model that's servicing European customer is using a data that is not necessarily kosher anymore because somebody says, please delete me. So now you have to now pick up wait for a new trained model with the data removed. You go through the whole QA period because you have to go through your QA and release it. Now that's just the one person asking. So what happens if another person asks, please delete my data, and so on and so on and so on. Or worse yet, we all know about the copyright infringement lawsuits that's going against OpenAI and ChatGPT models. What if some of them win? Well, they're going to have to retrain the model. Well, can you imagine the reverberation in the industry of everybody who just embedded ChatGPT model of having to rework everything they're doing? And what if they lose multiple times, right? So the concept of the unlearning is a fascinating idea, and it brings AI closer to how humans behave, right? This idea of making sure that, kind of AI mimicking how humans learn. The unlearn basically says, okay, don't retrain, but take the model that's already trained and train to learn the portion of the data. It's a gross simplification. And there are probably 3 or 4 leading research labs out there who are trying to implement this. A lot of this is not to the point of engineering commercialization yet, because this is, trailblazing. But thankfully, a number of the research organization, college-based research or a financed by industry-backed research organizations are now realizing, hey, wait a minute, being able to unlearn is really important because we need to be able to say, well, not only we stand by the data we use, just in case it wasn't good enough, we can unlearn that part without having to redo all this stuff, which is why it's very important that we start paying attention because it has a vast implication on not only the privacy, but the business cost and also the trust we give to the Gen AI model.
Yeah. Wow. I so many thoughts on this. I'm thinking of an old sci-fi named Johnny Mnemonic. I don't know if did you ever see that one?
Yes.
Where he had given up part of his brain for transmitting data, and of course it could damage his brain in taking it out. I mean, this is one area where the human brain doesn't necessarily store things that aren't interconnected to other things. And I think it's so important for people to realize these large models basically are crunching on insane amount of data. It's costing millions of dollars. Then it's putting it into a compressed file system that's not like you can't go in and look up where Martin is and that. It's its own kind of own, not really language, but its own structure it uses to then draw data off of. So it is a little, when you mention like the brain, in that you can't just like generally cut a tiny place out of the brain and then that memory's lost because it seems to be distributed. And this is a huge deal, especially with what you mentioned in Europe, which is GDPR. And then that's been around for a while, that says, you can't, I describe it as, you can't stalk me without my permission. And if I ask you to leave me alone, you'll do it. So I think this is such a fascinating topic because they've got all these systems learning. And how do you get something out? How do you, and of course, we've already seen what happened with Google, where they tried to compensate for a problem they found and it swung the other way. So Google of all people's kind of already proven this doesn't, once you meddle with this, it can be a train wreck going in another direction.
It is, and this is where, the LLM in particular, the large language model, is slightly different than a traditional models that we've dealt with. Traditional models with machine learning models have been very predictable, where if you give a data set and say, tell me what it is, it'll consistently tell you, pretty much the same answer over and over again. LLMs don't work like that. You ask LLM the same question twice, you may or may not get the same answer. Now, the gist is the same, and again, that's why LLM is more human-like in some sense, because no humans answered the same question twice exactly the same, which is why, the lawyers like to ask you five different times to make, or cops to that, in a lot of the movies, that because that's a human nature, we don't answer exactly the same, and they're trying to catch that moment. But LLMs are very much like that, where you don't get the same answer twice. It's very much like a neural net, behind, and therefore, messing with something that it already saw and learned is incredibly difficult. And I think that's part of the reason why unlearning has taken so long for people to kind of start tackling it. It's like, okay, we've spent a lot of energy trying to make the LLM work, and it works well, right? And there are some interesting, exciting things coming out. Like, for example, um, I know there are, teams actually testing getting LLM to actually do a prompt engineering, so it can actually prompt itself, two different parts, or carrying out a conversation to each other, start learning like that. But unlearning is a pretty sophisticated problem to crack, but it's a problem that's worth cracking, because without it, a adoption will be quite slow, because there will be a lot of people who's still going to be sitting on the sideline going, without that problem solved, I don't know if I really want to go all in on this.
Yeah. Yeah, because if somebody in the company puts something in, we can't easily get it out.
That's
That
correct.
they
So
shouldn't have or made a mistake. It's not like you can go in and delete a record.
that's exactly right. I mean, most of the IT problems, wherever, even the vulnerabilities, have always been dealt with. Well, we'll find where the problem is, we'll find the vulnerability, and either we'll remove it or we'll patch it or get around it. LLMs don't work exactly like that, and which is part of the reason why some of the more conservative organizations are still sitting on the sideline going, not sure about it. We have to say we're doing it because our board tells us that we're going to look like idiots if we don't say Gen AI. But the truth is, on the ground is the acceptance is still not quite there, because there are all these little problems that people are thinking in the back of their head, and there's no clear cut assurance to these problems.
So I've worked enough with attorneys to know that one thing they don't like in business or individually is data being deleted. So in Europe, how are they dealing with the legal issues? You're running a business and people can come in, or you can go to Google and say, delete everything I just did. And particularly if it's maybe bad activity, money laundering and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I think there is a difference between a business data and some of this personal data. So like, you can't say, delete my transaction. That's not going to be kosher, or delete, my banking records. But, delete my address, or delete, my even like my preference or purchase record. Something that are more personal related is it's what that's really meant for is, you know, it's getting too easy, and people are getting overexposed on the internet. And if there's enough bad actors cracking things, it's easy enough to get a whole 360 view of you just from all the data that's been spilled and leaked and publicly available. And some people are saying, well, that's enough. I want some of those data deleted, because without my consent, somebody else can really reconstitute most about me to the point where they can actually start predicting or start measuring, my likes and dislikes and my preference and things like that without my consent. And that's where the European regulation is coming from. It's all about the consent. Is without consent, I'm going to make it really hard or impossible to do these things, because I don't want those data available.
Well, that's really interesting, Harrison. Thank you for sharing that. And could you think of an example, actual, or maybe one you could predict, where something could go really wrong? You're running a business and your system is not unlearning. And you mentioned maybe some customer interface stuff and all that, but what could really go wrong with that in a business, do you think, without
Um,
unlearning?
so one of the things that I can think of that's a kind of a little bit more, you know, sometimes it may sound a little dystopian, but it is not, because we're seeing it with the software supply chain. Is you're seeing all these bad actors building backdoors, right? And building the code that's, the latest one is the XZ, where, SSH, which was supposed to be highly secure, and this code is supposed to be able to steal all your keys, which is disastrous because you can actually literally steal an admin key and have a backdoor, right? Um, what if somebody um, put a bad data or a backdoor on your model through the data engineering? So model itself is solid, but it fed the data in such a way that either it created a bias that was not readily apparent, or has a backdoor that was not readily apparent, right? So, Martin, you mentioned the Google case where a bias was very apparent, right? But you can easily see where if a training becomes sophisticated enough, you can create a model well, but then you can create a data or constitute a data in such a way that it will create a bias that's quote unquote hidden or not apparent. And it may show up when customers ask certain set of questions. And all of a sudden, your company takes a hit because, well, your customer agent just told me something that I can't believe it said that, right? Um, Now, without unlearning, your only option is shut it down and say send a policy, right? If you have an unlearn, just like patching those, a vulnerable code, you can start patching those agents and models quickly. So unlearning actually gives you an option to start treating models more like a code where in a critically vulnerable situation, you patch and move on, or you say unlearn and move on. As long as, now if it's model related, you can't really do that. But if it was data engineered, you can at least have an option to quote unquote patch or forget and move on. So that allows you to actually have a very, a speedy remediation option available to you, which makes the adoption of the model more readily palatable to a lot of business.
Fascinating. Well, I would. We have so many topics. I'm gonna. That was just so important that people need to at least have an idea that unlearning is an important aspect
Mhm.
of machine learning in the development, and that's
Mhm.
why in the training we do, we tell people for the small business, take your key numbers out and get it to come up with something that is either with dummy figures or something else, where you get an idea, you get the letter written, but it doesn't have all the confidential data, because for the micro business owner, we're getting them to use it at the free level. That's where you can't turn off, don't keep track of this stuff as easily. And so, this looks like this is still pretty good news for a small business to protect itself around the unlearning issue, where you aren't putting your confidential, most secure data into the system, but you might have it write a press release and it's more generic with a different customer name and stuff.
Hmm.
But I'm eager to I want to move on to some of the others. We have so many fun topics here. Which one do you want
Well,
to go for next?
let's talk about, let's back to kind of big business for a minute.
Okay.
Let's talk about blockchain. All
Okay.
right, and many people think that blockchain is only associated with
Right.
cryptocurrency, and you've indicated, and we know that it's got other uses. Particularly often cited is using blockchain technology in software supply chain. Can you
Mhm.
tell us how blockchain is being used or will be used in that area?
Yeah.
Sure. So, I mean, software supply chain makes you think like, high-tech IT stuff, but this is no different than how, like, for example, Coca-Cola is adopting blockchain, how, a number of other manufacturing companies are adopting blockchain to basically certify, like, for example, their suppliers are not using a child labor, or, their ingredients are coming from a conflict-free zone, and they certify it. And, one of the and it's not that they haven't done that before the blockchain, but the difference is, one, there has always been the nagging feeling of, are they rigging it, right? How can we trust it, right? And it usually require, you know, a lot of a back and forth trust from a big vendor going out and making a trip, and even making a regular annual trip to make sure that it's being measured. And also, when they get their certification paper or whatever, it's like, is it real? Is it fake? There have always been that question. And one of the things that blockchain does for you, and we're talking about a blockchain technology, not the blockchain, the crypto that supports crypto. A simplest way of, you guys know, but simplest way that I like to explain blockchain is it's a series of a statement or contract that's available to everyone, and that's a secured by encryption that's trusted, and which means, one, it solves two problems. One, it's readily available, highly visible, and two, it's trusted because we trust the encryption, right? Um, so going back to the software supply chain, um, this is a number of the problems that we also see on the software side is, gone are the days of, 10,000 software engineers writing everything proprietary, right? Every large companies, including the people you buy software from, use open source, use, licensed product, use somebody else's library. Why? Because at the end of the day, there's just so many ways to move data. There's only so many ways to encrypt something. There's so many ways to actually open a port, right? Why would you want to create another one? If there's a one that's good enough, go use it. It's cheaper, easier, and if everybody else is using it, then there is a natural trust of a mutual trust of, oh, if million people are using it, it must be examined and tested in all this different environment. It must be good. The problem with that is, as we have seen, there are two issues. One is, um, there are bad actors kind of mimicking a trusted source. And this happens a lot in, like, for example, if you are like a fan of like a Terraform, you will notice that, like, you go to Terraform plugin, you know, and you want to use, I'm making this up, a VMware. There's one from VMware and there's one from probably somebody else's basement. And who do you trust? And if you name it similarly and you give a description similarly, how can you know? And these are the problems that, and same thing goes for the libraries that you include. So if you apply the blockchain as a way of kind of ensuring the chain of custody, and guaranteeing the authenticity of a certain libraries, that's actually one of the easiest way to solve this problem of is, I don't have to go to some website and say, is this genuine? I can just look at the blockchain record and go, I trust this because I see the whole series of it, right? Because still this day, open source is built on trust, but the trust foundation is, well, okay, I went to that website and it says everybody else is using it and X number of people downloaded it, it must be good, right? There is no definitive trust like the supply, manufacturing companies are doing with the supply chain and security with the blockchain. So the question I have is, and I've been talking to a number of folks, is why not blockchain? Um, and the develop engineering team try to do it in a similar way, like, for example, by adopting Git. All the commit record is open, quote unquote. So they've always had the openness, but they've never had the kind of the decentralized trust of a blockchain of the record. And that's something that we're missing. And I think that's something that we have to seriously consider because more, I mean, SolarWind was what, 5 years ago? And it hasn't stopped. And there are genuinely bad actors who are trying to subvert the open source models. Those are slightly different problems. But in every day, in a corporate development, how many times have you heard some engineer going, "Oh, I found a really useful library and we're going to use it." Okay, why? How do I trust it? Why should I trust it? And, at the end of the day, if we had a record, a certified record that's backed by blockchain, that becomes not an emotional discussion, but a data-driven discussion that says, here is the chain of custody. I trust it because I see this, or I don't trust it because I don't have the visibility, right? Right now, at the end of the day, it becomes more of a opinion discussion, even though engineers don't like to admit it, because at the end of the day, it's all about, well, I went through these kind of checklists and it's good enough for me. But at some point, we need to remove that and become more objective. And a blockchain is a way to do that.
Add something for people about blockchain because one way I describe it, it's like a ledger sheet that you can't change what's there, but you can add on to it. So there's, whoever adds it is trackable that, oh, Bob came in and made an adjustment versus the old, I'm old enough to know Lotus 123 and VisiCal and Excel and all. You could go in and modify something, but we couldn't prove who made that modification. I think that's the people need to understand. Not only has a transparency and it's based on that idea of honesty can be improved using transparency. If I'm the vendor, I have one private key that signs it like a digital signature. No one else gets that. As long as I secure that, no one else can have it. So if someone else builds a software like it, they go, well, with the public key, that doesn't match that it came from Martin. And so I want to add that as a piece to understand with this is this also works with how blockchains work with contracts. I mean, people don't realize little goofy NFTs are really just contracts, digital contracts. So I think that's a fantastic idea where we're not just using it with products so we know where it came from. So if somebody says, oh, I'm guaranteeing there's no child labor involved in what we do, and then we find there might be something, we can track it right back to the exact person in the blockchain who signed off on it in a way more secure than ever before, where versus a signature or even a digital signature has a little bit of chance of being forged. Yeah. And so that's why I think this is such an important thing to consider because we need accountability. I mean, I don't know how accurate it is, but one of the big things on the electric vehicles is some of the things are mined by they're supposed to be automatically mined, but they're mined by citizens and children. And again, I don't know the accuracy of it, but if we had a blockchain, we might be able to easily go check that and find out, wait a second, you're claiming machines are doing it, but you've got poor labor that is endangering their lives getting this cobalt out or whatever from the ground. We can see the path right here. So this has multiple levels and why we believe that the biggest mistake people make is thinking, oh, blockchain has to do with Bitcoin. No, blockchains actually is a tool that made the security and strength of Bitcoin valid, and I like to say workable. I mean,
transact, right?
I'm sorry, but almost we just have something where AT&T just got hacked on records. Well, there's been no hacking of Bitcoin. There's been people losing their key or having it stolen from them, but it still hasn't been hacked at the level we get hacked, banks and everything else all the time. So it's really proven extremely stable system at, I'm looking at it, 65 or 68,000 per Bitcoin, just for fun tracking it. So, before you poo poo that, it's right now the most secure thing out there in our monetary system. Why not apply it to other things? Fantastic idea. And
And you know, I the one thing that I'd like to add is Bitcoin, being secure is also the nature of a blockchain promotes openness. Anybody can see it. And that was the foundation of the open source technologies. If everybody can see it, it will be better, more secure, more stable, because everybody will be able to examine it, criticize it to the point where we can make it better and hopefully to near perfection. And blockchain is promoting that. And that's something that I hope that the people will understand, because unfortunately, the association with the Bitcoin makes it even more obscure in the sense, in people's perception. But blockchain is an open platform. Anybody can jump in and see it.
yeah. And well, there's something apparently on, I think, Linux or something, where there was an update of some sort that was occurring, and everyone was looking at it and found, oh, there's a back door here, because there were so many ideas analyzing it. So yes, this is a great example, and I'm sure this is going to be fitting into, we're going to have automated systems, we're going to have robots, and then we need to track what occurs, because the blockchain doesn't care if a human signed off or a machine, as long as they have the authorizing key that can't be duplicated on the system. That's why one of the jokes of Bitcoin is it's the first currency that a computer could hold stored value on.
Well, and the other thing I was going to point out too
Yeah.
is like the big news about FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried in the crypto world. And
Yeah.
it's people think all crypto is not safe and all this stuff, and really it's more about the variability of returns that
Right. Right.
that
Yeah.
make it risky. And I'm guessing now he was prosecuted. People say, well, there should be more regulations on that. And he was prosecuted under standard oil financial fraud
Right.
crimes, okay, money laundering and some other things, using, as I understand, customer funds and in ways he shouldn't have, and was paying 25 years prison
Right.
time for that. But I'm guessing that if he had blockchain, it was actually the feds it helped them, right?
Well, they did with the Silk Road thing. They found the big Silk Road. You can see a documentary on it. The feds were able to track it down because in transparency, you might not know who has the key, but you can see this big $1 million moved at this interval. And then we noticed somebody bought a car over here for the exact amount, when that moved. So, it in some ways it has a safety way beyond our existing system. And we know it's proven because, of course, we have the blockchain being implemented for bank-to-bank transfers that's rolling out, and then possibly in the future our own currency, which of course I have mixed feelings on. I'm from Washington D.C. I want as little control from that city as humanly possible because I grew up to learn to not trust them.
I wanted to we've got a couple more topics
yeah,
before
yeah,
we wrap.
that's it.
But I wanted, before we finish this, you had mentioned before the show, Harrison, and we've talked about encryption, we've talked about internet trust, quantum computing. You had mentioned something about, this is another one like unlearning, like this is something we're not hearing a lot about.
But it's still going.
Quantum computing, where does that fit into the whole picture here?
Yeah, important.
Sure. So that's actually leading to a really good segue, because one of the reason we trust Bitcoin is one of them, but just in general, the internet transaction is because the idea that it's encrypted and it's protected. What most people don't understand is protected and encrypted doesn't mean it's uncrackable. What it means is it is unbreakable in a reasonable period of time with the current compute power. So if somebody is determined, if it takes too long, well, So, for example, if I intercept a bank transaction and it takes 50 years to decrypt, well, it's not very useful. Um, so the bottom line is these encryption keys are crackable, but not in a reasonable period of time, which is why, we've actually seen, the internet, encryption cryptography standard moving up from something that was considered to be good, but as compute power increased, not good enough. And then they went to something else that's a little more sophisticated and more sophisticated. We're at the point where it's pretty sophisticated. Quantum computing comes in because it kind of flips everything we know about compute, because our computer is zeros and ones, it's either on or off, and quantum computers don't work like that. It doesn't have the restriction of a on or off, and therefore it can actually do a massive amount of calculation in parallel in a very different way than the current compute, to the point where, and the another point that kind of is relevant is quantum computers are becoming more and more real. Is it like a real, like I can go buy it tomorrow real? No, but it's real enough that it's no longer theoretical. Large corporations are building it and they're actually proving certain results, and they're actually able to prove and solve certain mathematical sophisticated formulas that you relate to cryptography using quantum computers that we didn't think was possible. So where does that lead? Number one, we've proven so far, and this is a fact, that the most of the encryption keys that we use, cryptographies we use right now, will be broken with quantum computers in a reasonable period, like in minutes, if not hours, not years and not centuries. So that's a problem. Number one is, so cryptographies that we use are kind of not very useful when the quantum computers become popular. So worldwide, there have been a call to say quantum safe algorithm, and NIST has actually a quote unquote endorsed or approved a number of algorithms that are supposed to be a quantum safe, which means the algorithm that can be used by current set of compute power without too much overhead, because these are more sophisticated algorithms. And the downside of using a heavy encryption is it'll slow down your transaction. Of course it will, but not, to the degree that it's acceptable. And these are actually encryption that's quote unquote safe when the quantum computer comes. Now, that leads to a second issue, which is, in the area of healthcare, finance, and government, two things are against us. One, they're known to be the slowest trail follower in terms of the adoption of anything new in IT. They're more of a, if it works, don't fix it, leave it alone kind of mentality. And the other thing is the lifespan of a data in those sectors are typically long. What I mean by that is, in a retail, I bought a pair of shoes and I encrypt the transaction data. It's really not that interesting. If you encrypt it, year from now, it's not very interesting. The fact that my shoe size was certain and I like blue. It's not very damaging to me if somebody cracks that. Versus my checking account information, my life insurance information, my health information, my social security number, the lifespan of that data is quite long. And you don't have to crack it now. You can crack it 10 years from now and still be very, very valuable. So what's happening now is, and this is something that I had learned a few years ago, and it really surprised me and it scared me. And till this day, I wreck my brain trying to understand this. There are large hacking groups, mainly sponsored by state actors, that are intercepting encrypted communications. They don't even know what it is, but if they know that it's going from entity one to entity two, they're intercepting them. not because that's valuable to them now, but it might be valuable to them 10 years from now with quantum computers when they crack it.
That is such an important point where they're basically just they see something that's encrypted, they're grabbing it, they're storing it. Now they're working to get their quantum computers working to the level, and then they can test on it. And yeah, that's and we know, I mean, almost every company has had a major data breach. I just heard AT&T had one big one, and data. Well, if they get enough points and they can do this, they can really generate all types of havoc and hack
Well,
into many things. But I think you're right. We need to be watching the evolution of quantum computing. I just saw something on photonics applying to both machine learning and quantum computer,
yes.
where they might not have to cool it down to the sub temperatures that occur. My stepson, who's a senior data scientist, a few years ago took a course in fundamental photonics. That's using lights to basically operate like a transistor and frequencies. This is unbelievable because this is something they've had apparently a breakthrough in one of the mediums of doing this that's stable. So, it's something we need to watch. And from what I understand from my Bitcoin experts, even with quantum computer, it might take a little while to get into it. So
It
I'm going to put
will.
a plug into the Bitcoin that your bank might be higher a risk than it.
And the other thing that I will say is it's not that anybody is safer, because if you're using same encryption algorithm, you're same at the risk. But there is a difference in designing your system in such a way that you can swap out an encryption without, a whole lot of damage. And the problem with that is that there are a lot of the hardware based, like a network gears and stuff, where encryption is basically on the hardware. Well, swapping those out or doing a firmware update on all of those might be quite painful versus something like a lot of the algorithms for a cryptocurrencies where people have understood this is possible and they actually modularize the encryption, decryption, and the data protection side of the things. you know it might be a whole lot easier to swap out the in and out algorithm and actually just keep on ticking. So, it also goes down to going back to the kind of the similar unlearning and agility. It's all about how fast can you adapt to the change. And like you said, the openness of the algorithms and the ledgers being on the open will actually foster a much faster and much better agility in being able to cope with these kind of changes than a lot of the closed environment that we seem to operate in finance sector, government sectors, and healthcare sectors, which I do worry that they're not paying enough attention to some of these threats.
Maybe they'll watch our show and learn. Well, because I mean, we all know government and banks, especially. I have people that work in coding in banks. I mean, they're the slowest to move. I understand why, because they want to be careful and not mess something up. But they would be some of the worst targets to hit because they've got very valuable data. They have a new requirement for small businesses where now you have to put your ID in and contact the government. It'll be a big fine at the end of the year. Well, now it's another data point for me to be hacked. And they're claiming they're doing it to stop bad actors at the expense of making the whole rest of us more vulnerable to a hack. And, I guess, all I say is try to educate your legislators on technology whenever you can, because they just, it's now into live a video I did with an attorney talking about this. And this is now I've got to put my data another point in the government, quote, so that bad actors will be caught and we're all now more vulnerable to be hacked. So yeah, I think watching quantum computing is excellent. We'll probably need to do an update with you in 6 months on this. It's changing that fast.
It is.
Well, that's a scary thought to me, and I
Yeah.
hadn't not realized that. So thank you for pointing that out. And like you say, all of us need to be on alert
Yeah.
about the impact of quantum computing. It sounds like, and people need to figure out ways to provide some security against that.
Yeah,
It sounds like.
and as citizens, we need to be asking, what are our legislators doing?
Yeah.
What are our banks doing? And be raising our hands. Excuse me. What are you doing to protect us? One thing I want to make sure we cover is ethics, AI, private, and jobs. I
Okay.
think if we
Right.
can do that, that's what I like to talk, because the ethics of this. You clearly have a passion for both the detail and the abstraction and the ethical aspects. And
So I think there are a couple of things that I can think of in ethics part, which is um, one is, and this it's already a problem, which is I think we shouldn't be afraid of publicizing or declaring that we are using AI. We are actually leveraging AI to actually produce a better outcome, because AI helps me to get through like a mundane drudgery and get to the creative, the important part of this delivery much faster, and helps me actually focus on that part longer and more than having to do this, drudgery part to get there. Um, I think the fear of AI is stopping people from openly saying, hey, I am using AI, my productivity is better, you should too. Because a lot of people think, well, if I use AI and I'm producing all this stuff, maybe they'll replace me with somebody less than me and they'll just let them use AI. But, and this is where I think a fundamental understanding is missing is AI cannot replace your creativity. AI actually has a codependency on you. What I mean by that is AI has to learn from you. You have to give a data. AI will spit out some answers, and you give a feedback and say, "No, that was close," or "Wow, boy, that was way off." Can you try this, right? And through that interaction, um, not only AI gets better, you get better because you understand that, and maybe a fancy word of this is prompt engineering, but a better way is by codepending on each other, you both get better. The AI gets better, and you get better at doing things. Now, if somebody ejected you from their seat and brought somebody fresh who didn't know as much about the context and the data, they're not going to be able to get as much out of the AI because it still needs your knowledge and the understanding of the data to feed it to. Otherwise, now you have to let AI kind of fish from the dark in the wide sea, which is not the best way to. I mean, you can do that, but it'll take a lot longer and it'll take more trial and error to get to a similar outcome that somebody who was better was getting much sooner. So, if we understand that and accept that and say, it can't really replace you now, and this also, comes to a slightly different part of this cultural discussion, which is output versus outcome. So a lot of us think output is great. Well, it's not. It's outcome that everybody likes. You have to deliver a good outcome. It doesn't matter if you work a day or 5 days. If you deliver an outcome that made customers happy, then it didn't matter that you worked either 1 day or 5 days. It's not an output. It's an outcome game, right? If we can get our head around that, then we can say, okay, then I don't need to produce all this drudgery of output. I just need outcome. And AI can help me get to the outcome much faster. So I like that. So people who tend to confuse the output versus outcome are afraid of AI because they're going to say, well, AI can produce a lot of output. Well, we know that, but now all of them are good. I mean, we've seen what AI generates, and some of them are pretty bad, and some of the early works were horrible, and some of the the memes that are produced, about the visual AI part is actually hilarious because when it goes wrong, it goes horribly wrong. So, the output, yeah, it can crank out so much, but not all of it is good. Just like people can crank out so much, but not all of it's good. So if we can focus on an outcome and then partner with the I think we can actually turn the perception around and have more acceptance of an AI and start looking at AI as a helper, a partner who's codependent instead of a robot that's here to replace me. Because LLM is certainly not that. It's not anywhere near the point of replacing your creativity. And as a matter of fact, employers hired you to become creative, not produce drudgery.
Yeah, I think that's so well brought up, and it lines up with what my stepson, has said is, the greatest way to get manipulated and abused by AI is stay ignorant of it. And the best defense is starting to learn it and starting to dip your toe and starting to, experience something, even if it's, I've got these 3 items in my refrigerator, suggest 5 dishes, something real simple. So it, because those of us already that have started learning how images work and not work are better at catching deep fakes right now. Not that they won't get harder to detect than those that don't. So I love that. And then also with the people working from home, we need to be, let's get results driven. So, I'm an employee that can learned and used how AI, and I can get more results than another employee. Guess what? I'm the more valuable asset. I'm the product where the money they invest in me gives a higher return on investment. So I think that's such an important aspect of that. And your LinkedIn profile shows you've done a lot of training knowledge on it, which we'll put below as well, in understanding these things.
I couldn't agree more because I think a lot of the mistrust, have also gone, have come into it because of this, I'm working from home, they don't see me. I need to look busy, I need to stay busy. Again, output instead of outcome. If I look busy, if I stay busy, maybe they'll kind of leave me alone. No, we hired you to produce outcome, not output. If we wanted the random output, then we would have just purchased a random random generator.
Well, I was going to say too that you've talked about comparing this industrial revolution with prior ones, and
Yeah.
Martin and I have talked about that
Yeah.
at some of our sessions, and you talk about the being intimidated by the automobile versus the horse and buggy.
Right. Yes.
And
Yeah.
and there is an intimidation
Yeah.
fact, and things will change. I mean, when that change occurred, you no longer needed buggy whip makers like you
Right.
used to, and so your job is going to potentially change,
Yeah.
right? And that's what you're saying too, is like you're going to be forced to be more creative. You might have to upskill, you might have to get certifications, you might have to do these things to be able to be that output person,
No.
not the outcome person, not the output person. Is any
Mhm.
thoughts about, and maybe this is a crystal ball thing, I
Good.
don't know, but like what jobs could possibly be created that maybe we don't know,
Oh, okay. That's a good thing to end on.
today?
What do you think are some jobs that might become more important or are being new that really hadn't existed before? That's a good one.
Maybe it's happening already. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, no, we're in the middle of it. Yeah.
I think we're in the middle of it. Now, the one thing that I would say, the job that it currently exists but has, you know, will become very, very important is the data engineers and data scientists. Now, their job will change because a lot of the data analysis part will be assisted by AI. But the flip side of it is AI is powerless without the massive amount of data it feeds on. But also that massive amount of data has to make sense. It has to be good data. AI, AI is a kind of the epitome of garbage in, garbage out. You feed garbage, it'll spit out garbage exactly to you because that's what it learned, right? So, the one of the things that we don't seem to talk about is every company is saying we need to do AI, we need to do AI, we need to do AI. But first thing is, I ask this question usually, you know, does your data make sense? Because Dana heard me say this, but to me, AI is a 5-year-old prodigy. It is brilliant at doing some things. It's a genius savant, but it also needs a lot of direction. It's 5-year old. It does not make that connections just yet. It does not understand that's outside of its blindfold. So if you feed a data that's nonsensical or bad or inaccurate, and you just feed a pile of it, well, your AI is not going to perform well, and you're going to wonder, well, why am I not getting the return on the investment? Because I'm using the same model as everybody else. Well, because your data is junk. So, the things that we are not talking about enough is the importance of having good, clean data. Because you can make all kinds of very clever inferences if you have good data. But if you don't, then every conjecture and inference you make would be wrong because your data is wrong, or data is incomplete, or it's corrupt. So, that'll be something that I would add. There will be plenty of other jobs that are being created. We all thought that, prompt engineering would be the next hottest thing, except that now there is a, set of research teams that are trying to get prompt engineering out of people's hands, letting LLM to train LLM. So, that might be a short live. If that's successful, then all these people who went and got the prompt engineering courses may not be hot anymore. So, I think in the especially Gen AI side, because the field is still, I don't want to say immature, but it's still changing so much that it's difficult to predict what job it's going to create will be durable, what role or what need will be durable versus 18 months from now, we're going to say, well, that was not it. you know, we're going to turn the other way. So, that makes it really difficult to kind of predict where it's going to be that, durable next set of, the skills that people should go learn. Because I think we're still at the point of, every 3 to 6 months, things change.
Yeah, I'm going to end on the note where find out what you're already good at generating ROI for a business for. Then ask, what are the AI tools I can learn to be better? And I think that might be a good start for people instead of trying to anticipate in something changing so fast, so quickly as AI, where to jump to next. Why don't we take what you've have the most mastery with, and then let's make it sharper and more fine by learning the tools that make you better. So this was delightful. Oh my gosh, what a fun presentation. I'm going to ask, we'll put your LinkedIn would be the best for people to find you on, right? Very
Yeah.
good. You have a great LinkedIn profile. We'll put that below. And I just thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. Hope to meet you in person sometime. Thanks, Dana,
Sure.
for introducing us. I think this is a great show. I ask people, if you get value out of this show, really share it with several people, because I think we opened up a lot of things that businesses, professionals, associations, governments, and banks need to be thinking about.
Well,
Thank you.
one thing I
Thank
learned
you.
from you guys is I'm going to stop looking busy at work, and I'm actually going to start producing more outcomes. All right, so thank you for that.
And as a self-employed person, what do? Look in the mirror and go, what have you done? It's like the joke the guy says, yeah, I got fired today. He said, what happened? He says, I'm self-employed. I called in and said I was sick, and I knew I was lying, so I fired myself. Yeah, this was great fun. Great
Thank
fun.
you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. This has
Excellent.
been fantastic. Thank you
Yeah.
for the invitation, and thanks for the time.